Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Latifah Rahmadaniah Putri, and in this video, I will try to discuss and answer the question in passage 2. And the first step that we should do is listen to the audio. And here is the audio.
Now listen to part of a talk in a biology class.
All right, now a common misconception about global climate change, commonly referred to as global warming, is that if we experience an unusually hot day in this area alone, then it's evidence of climate change. I just want to take a second to make it clear that changes in local weather is a weather-related event, not a climate-related one. Climate refers to the long-term, predictable atmospheric conditions of a specific area, not the conditions of a day or even a week for that matter. Weather refers to the conditions of the atmosphere during a short period of time. Weather forecasts are usually made in 48-hour cycles and are more concerned with daily and hourly predictions. Yes, Henry?
So you're saying that climate has more to do with seasonal changes? For example, like the difference between summer and winter in New York, while weather is more about the conditions outside today or tomorrow.
That's right, Henry. So now that we have established exactly what we mean by climate, let me ask you about the causes of climate change. I mentioned them in the last class.
Well, we started by talking about the Industrial Revolution, which began in the early 1800s, and that's when most of society started burning fossil fuels like oil and coal. And those fuels release a bunch of carbon dioxide into the air, and when there's more carbon dioxide in the air, more of the sun's energy gets trapped in the atmosphere, so the climate of the Earth warms.
Perfect, Jessica. Maybe I should have you teach the class. So yes, most of us know about the harmful effects of the burning of fossil fuels and the release of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But what causes climate change? There are two more. Henry?
I know one is solar intensity, and the other, I think, has something to do with volcanoes? Sorry, I can't remember exactly.
Well, like you said, the intensity of the sun does change, believe it or not. Changes in the amount of heat from the sun has been proposed as one explanation for past climate events. And the third you're thinking of is volcanic eruptions.
That's right. I remember now. The gases released during an eruption can change the climate over a period of a few years. But this type of climate change is usually just short term, right?
Right. Now, let's get back to fossil fuels. As Jessica mentioned, increased amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are usually released through the burning of fossil fuels. Make no mistake, what may sometimes be reported in the media as debatable, there is no debate among scientists as to whether or not climate change is due to human activity. True, the strength of the sun's rays and the eruption of volcanoes can play a role, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, is to blame for the rise in global temperatures. And we are now starting to see the tremendous impact global warming is having on our environment. Between 2002 and 2006, Greenland lost almost 200 kilometers worth of glaciers. And as the glaciers melt around the globe, the sea levels rise, which threatens the coastal life of humans and the marine life of aquatic species. Now, many organisms on land are also being affected by the changes in climate. Temperature and rainfall play key roles in determining the geographic distribution of plants and animals. For example, researchers have shown that 385 plant species in England are flowering 5 days sooner than usual. In addition, insect species that pollinate and rely on these flowers are now arriving sooner than in previous decades. This mismatched timing of plants and insects could result in the loss of both species in the area. Small changes in the atmosphere have already made a big impact on species that rely on specific weather conditions. Most think of polar bears and their disappearing homeland of snow and ice. But this is just one of the many organisms threatened by global climate change, and that includes us humans.
After hearing the audio, we will try to answer and try to find the reason why we choose that option as an answer. And let's take a look to the first question. The first question is, what is the professor mainly discussing? And the options are A. The pros and cons of climate change, B. The causes and effects of climate change, and C. How to prevent climate change, and D. What happens when we burn fossil fuels. For this question, the correct answer is B. The reason why is because in that talk, in the beginning of the talk, the speaker said about a common misconception about global climate change. They explained how the causes and effects caused by climate change. It was proved in the middle of the talk when the speaker said, "Let me ask you about the causes of climate change. I mentioned them in the last class." Then after that, the talk explained the effects arising from climate change. So that's the reason why the answer to this question is B. A is wrong because in the talk, there is no thing that discusses the pros of the climate change. C is wrong because in the talk, there was no discussion on how to prevent climate change. And the last is D is wrong because it is not related to the conversation on the talk. Next question is, the professor discusses several causes and effects of climate change. Indicate which information matches a cause or effect. This question is worth 2 points. And for this question, after hearing the audio, I can say that volcanic eruptions and burning fossil fuels are cause, and for the effects are temperature changes and changes in rainfall. I said that because it mentioned clearly in the audio. Next, the third question. The question is, what is the difference between weather and climate? And for this question, we choose two answers. The options are, weather refers to condition in the atmosphere of a long period of time. B. Climate refers to forecast over a 48-hour period. C. Weather is more concerned with daily or hourly prediction. D. Climate refers to predictable long-term atmospheric condition. And for this question, the answer are C and D. The answer is C. The answer are C and D because in that talk they say about the difference between weather and climate. In that talk, they said climate refers to the long-term predictable atmospheric condition of a specific area, while weather refers to the condition of the atmosphere during a short period of time. So the correct answer and the right answer for this question are C and D. A and B are wrong because the statement doesn't match with what the speaker said. Next, the fourth question. The question is, according to the lecture, what is an example of the effects of climate change? The options are A. Polar bears have taken over all the glaciers. B. Insects don't know when to pollinate flowers. C. A large amount of flowers are blooming sooner than usual. And D. Many animals are searching for new homes. For this question, the answer is C. The answer is C because in that talk, they mentioned that temperature and rainfall play key roles in determining the geographic distribution of plants and animals. They said that, for example, researchers have shown that 385 plant species in England are flowering 5 days sooner than usual. From this question, we can conclude that flowers bloom faster than usual, so the correct answer is C. Option A and B are presented very similar to fake, but are actually misinformation that aim to break our focus. While the answer D is wrong because the statement was not discussed in that talk. And next, the question number 5. The question is, what is the professor implying when she says this? Perfect, Jessica. Maybe I should have you teach the class. And the answer for this question is C. The reason why is because when the professor says, perfect, Jessica, maybe I should have you to teach the class, it refers more to a sentence of praise where the professor is amazed at Jessica's knowledge. So the answer A, B, and D are wrong because the statement is more direct to the negative event, so the meaning of the professor's statement is to revert to the positive way. Therefore, the correct answer is C. The last question for this passage is, what does the professor imply about the role of human activity in climate change? The options are A. Humans are definitely largely responsible for climate change. B. We should listen to what the media says about human activity and climate change. C. Human activity is possibly part of the problem. And D. The media purposely tries to confuse people about issues. The answer for this question is A. The reason is because in the talk, the professor said that, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that human activity. And this statement leads to the statement that human activity have a major impact on climate change. B is wrong because the statement that contradicts what the professor said. And C actually says a statement that makes it hard for us to choose. But actually, this option is presented to deceive us because in this option, the statement is not fully in accordance with what the professor said because the professor said that human activities have a large role in this problem. And D is wrong because basically, the media are not trying to confuse us, but they only present the news according to the fact they find. And therefore, we cannot fully trust the media. The next passage that we are going to discuss are passage 3. And of course, the first step that we are going to do is listen to the audio.
Now listen to part of a talk in an astronomy class.
Okay, so I'm sure you all know what meteors are, right? Those bright shooting stars in the sky that sometimes pass through the atmosphere and land here on Earth's hot rocks. Well, these alien rocks go on quite a journey to make it here. You see, these meteors start off as comets from other areas in space. The ice in these comets melt when they get close to the sun, which breaks apart and sprays millions of tons of rock and dust into the solar system. As each of the larger dust and rock particles enters the Earth's atmosphere, it creates a brief, fiery trail that is often called a shooting star, but is properly known as a meteor. Since the particles move at speeds of many kilometers per second, friction with the air vaporizes them at an altitude of between 80 and 130 kilometers. The resulting flash of light fade out within a few seconds. To be visible, these shooting stars, or meteors, must be within about 200 kilometers of the observer. On a typical dark and moonless night, you can see up to 6 meteors per hour, maybe more. Now, I don't know about you, but witnessing a shooting star is really a magical feeling. Anyway, the typical meteor is produced by a particle with the mass of less than 1 gram, no larger than a pea. How can we see such a small particle? The light you see comes from the much larger region of heated, glowing gas surrounding this little grain of material. Because of its high speed, the energy in a pea-sized meteor is greater than a bullet being fired by a gun on Earth. But as I'm sure you all know, these shooting stars, these meteors, sometimes land on the ground. Meteorites are pretty much found in 2 ways. First are meteorite falls. Sometimes bright meteors or fireballs are observed to penetrate the atmosphere and find their way to the Earth's surface. The 2013 Chelyabinsk fireball in Russia produced tens of thousands of small meteorites, many of them easy to find because these dark stones fell on snow. People sometimes discover unusual-looking rocks that turn out to be meteoric. These rocks are termed meteorite finds, the second way meteors are found. Since the 1980s, meteorite finds in the Antarctic have dramatically increased our knowledge of space and its materials. More than 10,000 meteorites have been recovered from the Antarctic as a result of the motion of the ice in some parts of that continent. Meteorites that fall in regions where ice accumulates are buried and then carried slowly to other areas where the ice is gradually worn away. After thousands of years, the rock again finds itself on the surface, along with other meteorites carried to these same locations. The meteorites in our collections have a wide range of compositions and histories, but traditionally they have been placed into three broad classes. First are the irons, composed of nearly pure metallic nickel iron. The second are the stones, the term used for any rocky meteorite. The third are the rarer stony irons, made, as the name implies, of mixtures of stone and metallic iron. Of these three types, the irons and stony irons are the most obviously extraterrestrial because of their metallic content. Pure iron almost never occurs naturally on Earth. Therefore, if you ever come across a chunk of metallic iron, it is sure to be either man-made or a meteorite. The stones are much more common than the irons, but more difficult to recognize. Often, laboratory analysis is required to demonstrate that a particular sample is really of extraterrestrial origin, especially if it has lain on the ground for some time and been subject to weathering. The most scientifically valuable stones are those collected immediately after they fall, or the Antarctic samples preserved in a nearly perfect state by the ice.
Now, answer the questions. 1. What is the purpose of the lecture?
After hearing the audio, we will try to answer and try to find the reason why we choose that option as an answer. And let's take a look to the first question. The first question in passage 3 is, what is the purpose of the lecture? The options are A. To describe the ways in which we find meteorite on Earth. B. To explain how meteorites make it to Earth and their composition. C. To prove that meteorites are extraterrestrial. And D. To illustrate the process of collecting and examining meteorites. The answer for this question is B. The reason is because the main idea in the talk discusses how the meteorite works so that it can reach the Earth and how the content contained in the meteorite makes it works optimally. A is wrong because what is said in point A about where and how meteorites were found is not the main focus of the talk. C is wrong because the statement is not something new and is a common thing that no longer needs to be explained to everyone. Because we all know that meteorites are extraterrestrial beings. And D is wrong because the statement in point D is something that was not discussed too much in the talk. Next, the question is, which type of meteorite are considered the rarest? The options are A. Iron, B. Stones, C. Iron and stony irons, and D. Stony irons. For this question, the answer is D. The reason is that the talk clearly states that there are the rarer stony irons. So we can clearly conclude that stony iron are the rarest meteorites, not the iron or stones mentioned in option A, B, and C. Next, the question number 3, Why does the professor discuss meteorites in the Antarctic? The options are A. To prove that meteorite finds are the best way to find meteorite. B. To illustrate the need to look for more meteorite preserved in ice. C. To provide an example of a type of meteorite find. And D. To describe what happens when meteorite land on ice. For this question, the answer is C. The reason is, after listening to the talk, I conclude that the reason why the professor discussed meteorite found in Antarctica was because the professor aimed to show real example of the meteorite discovery. So that's why the answer is C, not A, B, or D.